All right, Jay, come on, man. Welcome to the podcast, brother. It's good to have you.
I'm excited to be here, Larry. Thanks for having me, man.
I'm excited to have you. Okay, so I'm looking at like this, and the audience heard it in the intro, but business owner, investor, entrepreneur, ultra athlete, fitness guy, husband, father of 3 boys. Like I'm starting to wonder, like, what does Jay not do?
I don't drink. That's how I get it done.
No way. So you don't drink any alcohol?
No, actually, I quit drinking 7 years ago when my first son was born. Yeah, 6 months after he was born, actually. Yeah.
So you quit drinking 6 months after your son was born. Was there an event that happened, or was it just like, I'm kind of done here?
There was cumulative events. Like I'm not the best at moderation, Larry. And having said that, I wasn't excessively out of control, but was dealing with a number of things like stress, happiness, celebrations, all of that a bit excessively, right? And my first son arrived like this polarizing messenger. Like, I had so many as you do, when you become a father, you realize all the cliches are true, right? It goes by blazingly fast, all of this. And the moments are so fleeting, but it just became clear to me, like what my role was at this moment on this planet, right? What I'm here to do and what my purpose is right now with this little baby and my wife and the family we wanted to grow. We've now got 3 little boys. It's lovely. And my goals became so much more important. My time became that much more valuable. I discovered very quickly, like, I don't want to have an off day. I don't want to have an off morning. If it's not serving the grand purpose right now, it's got to go. And so I was probably for the first time in my life, I just became super ruthless with my time. And as a consequence of becoming ruthless with my time, the frivolous moments had to go. And with that, for me, was alcohol consumption. It intended on just being a year. That was my first plan. It was like, I'm curious, if I remove alcohol for a year, will my life be different? Would it improve? I had no idea how much it would. And so, 3 months goes by. I feel like I got a bit more energy. It's cool. 6 months. I'm carrying more momentum through my life because I don't have these, biweekly disruptions, so the inertia continues. And 12 months in, I felt like I was just uncovering like some kind of a psychological renaissance. And I was like, I can't let this go now. I'll double down. And so it just kept on going. And for a handful of reasons now, I still don't drink. Get into why I don't today, but started as a 1-year experiment. Benefits massively surprised me to the upside. And I, today it's like, there's no desire at all to go down that path.
Fascinating. So as this podcast launches today, I am 1 month out from 1 year.
Hey,
myself. So, and
congratulations.
Thanks, man. So next month, literally 4 weeks from today, we have our Dad Edge Summit, and me and 21, kind of really odd number, 21 other men stood up on stage. I actually stood up on stage and I'm like, hey guys. And I just sort of did it without really even planning for it. I just sort of did it. But I had seen in our community a lot of men who just were struggling with it and trying to get their arms wrapped around it. And I'm kind of like you. I don't drink a whole lot anyway. But when I do drink, I have this urge to want to be like, oh, well, I can have one more and I can have one more. Very rarely, my wife always is just like 4. 4 is the magic number for you. 4 drinks, right? 4 beers, 4 drinks, 4 glasses of wine. That's it. After that, we just don't see the right Larry anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So for years, like I've always stayed 4 or under, right? And there's been rare occasions where I've gone overboard. But it's funny you mentioned this like tiny little like culmination of events. It wasn't anything really big or drastic, just like these tiny little things, right? But anyway, I would say I've had my drinking pretty much mostly under control and I say that because like I don't go over that 4 mark. Right. But I saw a bunch of guys in our community that are just like, man, I'm struggling. So many posts on alcohol. So last year at the Dad Edge Summit, I stood up. I'm like, hey guys, I'm going 1 year, no drinking. We're going to form an accountability group. I'm going to charge for it. No one's going to put money in it. No, nothing like that. No mastermind, no nothing. Just, you want to join me or not? We had 21 guys stood up and did it. And to date, we've only lost 1. Only one guy fell off. I'm shocked to see that number, but just goes to show how, you're in the right circle with accountability, it'll happen. But I'm curious for you, after you reached that 1 year mark, because I will tell you, this has definitely reshaped my drinking habits. It's definitely reshaped even the urge to drink. Like, dude, I wake up feeling fantastic nearly every day. Workouts are great. Body fat is the lowest it's been, best in shape I've been in years. And I mean, I'm sitting here thinking like, do I really want to go back? Or how am I going to maybe reshape my entire relationship with alcohol? But I'm curious, since mine is one month out, what was it? You hit the 1 year mark. Let's go back 6 years ago. You hit the 1 year mark and you're like, I could either celebrate right now, go crazy, or I could just keep going.
Yeah.
What was it?
Well, it was this, Larry. It was that I already knew what going back to alcohol was going to be like, because I'd been doing that for decades, right? Like most people, I started drinking when I hit maybe before, but late teenager, right? And I just kept going, So that inspired the first year, because it was like, I know what that life's like. I know that life's always going to be there. I can take a year off, and I guarantee you all the parties, all that's all going to be there waiting for me, right? If I take a year off, nothing's going anywhere. So I can always come back to this. But I didn't know what a life without alcohol would be like. So I wanted to try that. That inspired the 1 year. When I completed the 1 year, it was kind of the same decision. Two things I'll say. It was like compounding effects drive the best results in my life, right? And so if you feel great after a month of sobriety, you feel a lot better, in my experience, after 6. So after 12, what would 4 years feel like, right? And I was curious, like if these positive developments in my life, like you mentioned, body composition. I was always a fit guy. I had to replace my wardrobe though, because just how my body composition shifted when I abstained from alcohol. Better psychological energy, better psychological endurance, better physical endurance, better emotional control. Like I said, more momentum in my business. I didn't have down days or down mornings. And so I could carry momentum for weeks and months on end, instead of like a week or two and then I have a slow Saturday and it kind of knocks the train off the tracks. Even if just for half a day, it would impact, and eliminating that over time really moved the needle. But here's what I'll say about today is like, consuming alcohol is without question the most common extracurricular activity available to us in any developed nation. You're in Canada, the US, Germany, go to South Africa. It doesn't matter. If you want to take the edge off stress, you want to celebrate a win, you want to get that deal done, you want to forge a new relationship, the common denominator is cocktails or a couple beers. It is. Separating yourself from that, therefore, forced me to think much more critically about how I would do all of those things, right? Because I was now an outlier. That common theme wasn't available to me. So how was I going to take the edge off stress? How am I going to celebrate a win, forge a new relationship, get the deal done, all this stuff? And it forced me to think more critically and more independently, and therefore identify as an outsider and identify as a contrarian. And the value in that is that there's a lot of value in thinking independently and thinking critically and going your own path. But that's a lot harder to do than we like to admit. It's way easier to just go down the tried and tested path and follow the herd. That contrarian muscle, which has also served me very well in life, is something I need to flex consistently to get better at, right? And abstaining from alcohol is just like, it's a practice that it's more common today, but honestly, a lot more common than it was 5 years ago. And so, being that outlier just gave me a lot of confidence. It was like, I'm doing something that most people are not doing. The easy path is to just go out for drinks. And still, so many of my friends would be like, that's so great. So proud of you. Unfortunately in my business, alcohol is how deals get done. So I could never do that, because in my business, this is how business gets done. I'm like, dude, I work in finance. Like, what are you talking about? Everybody will say that about their industry. Everyone's got that, right? Oh, in my industry, this is how business gets done. It gets done over a couple of cocktails. And it's garbage. You can get through that. You can overcome that. But it will force you to be more creative with how I maintain clients, how I forge new relationships, how I celebrate a win. And it can be lonely. Like, I don't know if you experienced this, but like coming off a big win, and if the previous 4 or 5 years I go out and celebrate with a couple of shots at the bar with some friends, and I'd be like, oh, I can't do that anymore. There was lonely moments, right? There's downside to exiting that community for sure. But the positives outweigh the negatives for me. with massive scale. So, yeah.
100%, man. I mean, there are parts of me that I'm miss drinking. Well, I say that with big quotes, right? I miss drinking. What I actually miss is the connection. If I really look at it, I'm not missing that at all. I'm actually not. I'm actually enhancing it. So, like for instance, I know, like when it comes to my wife and date nights, right? Be like, oh, it's just so great that, we could have like my wife, she jokes with me. She's like, you picked a hell of a year to quit drinking. She's like, Larry, it's our 20th wedding anniversary. My brother's getting married. We have this, we have this, we have this, we have this. We went to Hawaii for 12 days to celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. We got remarried on the beach with our kids and that kind of thing. And she was even like, come on, like, you picked the worst year. And I'm like, well, it's also the hardest. So we'll see how it lands, but it's been fine. I've really enjoyed it. But what I can tell you is that, being that it's been removed now for 11 months, I don't think about it. It's not on my radar. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. I don't know if you've ever tried Athletic Brew beer. It's a non-alcoholic beer.
I've heard about it. I've never tried it.
Yeah. Cause I think I know they sponsor a bunch of these ultra events, like tons of them.
Yeah.
And, but I will tell you, man, it is like a cheat code. Like their beer is so good that I'm like, I cannot believe there's no alcohol in there. Like they have IPAs and all kinds of other stuff. Like I went to my brother's house, everybody over the weekend, my dad was there, our family was there, everybody was there, everybody was drinking. And they didn't even know that I wasn't drinking until the very end because I was drinking this. And my dad's like, what are you drinking? And I was like, oh, it's Athletic Brew. And he's like, what is that? And I was like, it's non-alcoholic. He's like, that's non-alcoholic? I said, yeah. He goes, let me try that. I tried it. And he's just like, are you sure that's non-alcoholic? I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. I was like, the CEO is 11 years sober. I was like, I'm sure. He's like, that's good. So, but I don't know. That's just kind of been my cheat code for this whole thing.
Yeah.
But I have noticed too, the mental, emotional, and physical transformation of not just, I just think like not having it in my system, I mean, like it feels really good. Like, I don't think there's a day that goes by I'm not training, I'm not working out. There isn't, and I also love the fact that my kids are older. I know your oldest is 7, but once they become teenagers, they really start to take notice. How much does dad drink, right? How much do other dads drink? Yeah. And it's really telling, man. We've been on vacation. We've been on flow trips and all kinds of stuff. My kids have seen more people drunk over the past year, I think, than any other year. And I don't. And they're like, they think it's kind of cool. So I think it's kind of cool. But what have you noticed as far as just relationships? And in particular, I want to know, how has this maybe impacted your level of patience and resilience with your boys? How's it impacted your marriage? And I'm curious if Gretchen still drinks.
Okay, so in terms of relationships, I've become much more clear on those which are truly deep and meaningful to me. And I have far less frivolous social acquaintances. Now, there's nothing wrong with frivolous social acquaintances. I tend to value the deep and meaningful more so. Like I've never been one to excel at small talk. If you want to go deep on something, I'm your guy. Let's go, but the how you doing, what's new at the sort of edges of a house party, no interest in that. And back to where we jumped off from, I was like, it kind of came from a place of me wanting to be more ruthless with my time. Well, that permeates everything, and it's permeated my relationships as well. And there's a great Paulo Coelho quote. He says, if you're brave enough to say goodbye, life will reward you with a new hello. And I found that to be the case in terms of how my social network might have been juggled over the first few years of me abstaining from alcohol. I said a few goodbyes, no hard feelings, but and welcomed a few new hellos. And some of those hellos were just deeper relationships with people that I already had relationships with, but now we just go deeper. And I've really valued that. Patience with my kids. here's how it's impacted patients with my kids. Because removing alcohol has improved my performance in so many buckets of my life. Let's start with my business. I'm a more consistent, predictable, and even-keeled leader. I'm a better manager of my people. If you were to interview my staff of 8 years ago versus my staff of today, you'd think they were talking about two different people. And that's largely because I'm happier with the trajectory and success of my business. So I show up in a better mindset at work. That comes back to me carrying momentum for longer durations because I don't have these disruptions in performance. And I carry that mindset home with me. So I show up a little bit more confident in myself, a little bit more confident in our future, a little bit more proud of what I've built from a business standpoint, a little bit more proud of my athletic pursuits. I mean, I've always been an athlete, but I'm fitter today at 39 than, I really recall being, truthfully. I've always been a martial artist. I've always been a trail runner, all this stuff, a bit of a gym rat for sure. Today, I'm a competitive triathlete and ultra marathon runner. And I am, my fitness level is arguably, it is. I mean, it is. And, I've got an ultra marathon this Sunday that a buddy called me 4 days ago. It was like, hey, are you running the Squamish 50? And I said, no, I'm not. I'm training for a triathlon right now. And he said, well, you should do it. It's going to be awesome. And of course I was like, you're right. I should do it. It's going to be awesome. So, if I was fit, 8, 9 years ago, I wasn't able to turn around and run, a small ultra, but a small ultra on 10 days notice. And I love just having that in the tank. Like, yeah, this is how I want to be. Like, this is my baseline. I don't want to be weaker than this. Anyways, all those like little buckets of achievement, they carry into my mindset when I show up at home with the kids and I'm just a happier, more settled human being. And that impacts my patience with them big time, right? Because I don't know if you found this to be the case, but like when I'm impatient with them, it's not because they're being poorly behaved. Sometimes maybe, well, no, I mean, they're poorly behaved all the time. They're 2, 4, and 7, but like how I respond to that is directly related to how I feel about myself. And if I feel really good about myself and confident in who I am and what I'm doing, then I show up differently. I show up patient and considerate, and I lead instead of tell. I explain instead of shout, and we talk through problems instead of just me just forcing the solution. It's all kinds of but it comes from like I feel good, so therefore I am less reactive. And feeling confident allows that in me. Yeah.
No, I love that. I've experienced the same thing myself. And this is where I think it's so important. I think just globalizing this whole thing is, taking optimal care of ourselves. And that's also the absence of things that don't care for us, right? I mean, I think most men consider like, well, if I have to take care of myself, it's things that I'm doing. Well, it's also things you're not doing, right? So I think that's huge. And I think it definitely plays in. If you're not feeling like mentally and physically wrecked from a night of drinking, and that's not going to impact how patient you are with your kids the next day, oh man, think again, right? And by the way, 50-mile race or 50 kilometers? Not that it really makes...
It's 50 kilometers. Yeah, it's 50 kilometers. I think 2,700 meters of elevation, just around the Squamish Mountains, around where I live. Yeah.
No big deal. Just 33 miles. It's like a warm up, really.
I think that's the easy part, man.
Man, that's awesome.
And my wife does not drink. You asked whether my wife
drinks.
Doesn't. She does not. No, she quit a year and a half ago. Exactly. Yeah, a year and a half ago. And she was never a big drinker, but she really appreciated nice wines, and a year and a half ago, she just quit. She just quit. Yeah. Had a big night on New Year's Eve and decided never to go back to it. Didn't like how it made her feel. She's very nutrition focused. My wife drives the nutrition in our house, and she's exceptional at sort of diving into macros and micros. And she just made a judgment call. She's like, this is a toxin. Why would I let this toxin into my life when I don't really let any others, willingly into my diet plan? So, yeah.
My wife and I were just joking about that because she made a mention. We just went out on a date for our 20-year anniversary last week. And she was like, she made a mention. She's like, gosh, like you did pick the worst year to give up drinking, as she's getting ready to have a drink herself. And she was telling me that she's like, I will say this though. over the past year, I've drank considerably. And my wife has never been a big drinker, ever. I've known her for 26 years. I've seen her drunk 5 times, maybe. I mean, she's just 2 drinks, she's good. So, but she told me, she's like, I drink considerably less than what I did before, which wasn't as much earlier. She's like, but now that I do it very sparsely, she's like, I can tell you, like, I feel like total crap when I do it. And I was like, and do you know who James Swanwick is? The guy who invented Swannies, you know, the Swanee blue blocking glasses.
No, I'm familiar with the product, but I don't know the human. Yeah.
So James Swanwick was the one who came up with those, but he's got 2 different businesses. One is the Swannies, and the other one is a 90-day program to help people basically eradicate alcohol out of their lives. Because I don't think he's drank in, like, I don't know, like 11 years or something like that. But he talked and joked, and this is where Jessica and I were joking about this. I was like, yeah, you should have heard how James Swanwick actually really presented what alcohol truly is. And she's like, well, what do you say? And he's from Australia. He's like, well, think about it for a second. He's like, the waitress comes up to you and is like, would you like this clear poison that comes in this beautiful bottle on ice or just up? and I just started dying laughing when he said it. And I was like, oh my God, that is actually so true. He's like, yeah, it's literally a poison in a beautiful bottle. If you really take a look at what it is. I was like, that's fascinating, because that is what it is. So, yeah.
That is what it is. Yeah.
That is what it is. You know, so I want to segue into another topic. You know, you obviously are very clear-headed. You seem like you're very deliberate, very intentional with the decisions that you make. And part of who you are and how you're wired is you like to actually study psychology. Why do we make decisions the way that we do? You know, how can I be a better critical thinker and make better decisions? But in your pursuit of really understanding psychology, what have you come up with as far as, I would love to just ask, like, what are the most common pitfalls that people just randomly decide and buy in on without even realizing it, and probably what it's costing them?
I think the most common would be, I'll quote a palliative care nurse named Bonnie Ware.
Oh,
you might have heard this quote before. She was a palliative care nurse in Australia for 20 years. She cared for people on their deathbed, and generously she recorded their dying sentiments. The most common of which, over the course of 2 decades, was, I wish I had lived a life true to myself instead of the life I thought others wished I would. So after 20 years of listening to people on their deathbed, the most common thing she heard was that people wished they had lived the life they wanted to live instead of the life they thought other people wanted them to live. I think that is real important to pay attention to, because she is one person. This is her lived experience, but it was 20 years of active care. That's a large sample. That's a large population sample. And if we put a lot of weight on that, what that means is that's the most probable outcome for all of us, is that on our deathbed, we will wish we pursued our dreams, not the dreams we thought other people wanted us to pursue. And I'd say that that's the common pitfall that keeps me up at night, you know, anecdotally. And so how do you deal with that, right? How do you ensure that you're pursuing yourself at all costs and not, conceding ground to what you really want to do because you think it might make somebody else uncomfortable? Maybe, your parents wanted you to do this. Your social circle expects this from you. This is the path that everybody else I know has gone, so I should probably do that too, instead of this maybe seemingly erratic or reckless path that I want to go down myself. So, I study psychology because I want to understand how I make decisions, and I'm an investor. It's a big part of my day and my livelihood. So understanding the nuances behind good and bad decisions is really, really impactful and important to me. Let me just run through a couple concepts that I find kind of interesting. So it's a romantic idea to trust your gut, right? We all want to say, oh, trust your intuition, trust your gut, right? It sounds good on paper. But if you dive into what really occurs when you trust your gut, trusting your gut or your intuition, it's just accepting the output of an algorithm. The algorithm is all the inputs that you have in your life, the things people have said to you, the education you've had, the lived experience, whatever you saw occur. And when you're presented with a choice, this algorithm calculates your life experience and puts out an output, right? The answer, here's what I should do, right? Sometimes this is great. This is like a good outcome for you. I was training on my bike like a week ago. It was early in the morning. I came around a corner on my bike and ran right up onto a mama bear and two cubs. The algorithm said, hit the brakes, get off the bike, put the bike between you and the bear, and brace for chaos, right? And that algorithm gave me that answer because I've had a lifetime of exposure to the idea that bears are dangerous. But most encounters end peacefully. So as a consequence, I saw the bear. My gut reaction was to hit the brakes, put the bike between the bear and myself, but remain calm because most bear encounters end peacefully. It was the right decision to trust my gut. Where we can get in trouble is, we're also quite programmed because of a life of experience that tells us there's safety in numbers, right? I got lost in a grocery store when I was like 6 years old. I remember being terrified, and reuniting with my family was safety, right? There's safety in the herd, right? I used to get picked on a lot when I was a teenager, ruthlessly so. And I determined at that point in my life, there was safety in numbers. It's dangerous to be alone. And this kind of safety in the herd life lesson is often taught to us many times as you grow up. But that same lesson can prevent us from pursuing a path that is unique to us as we get older. If we just follow the herd, stick with the pack, do whatever the person beside us is doing. In the market as an investor, this really hurts investors, because often the number one reason that people allocate capital, they buy a stock, is because other people are doing it, right? There's safety in the herd, and it blows people up in the market all the time. The FOMO buying, the fear of missing out buying, that causes people to pile into asset classes without really thinking critically about them. Happy to go into that with more detail. But, the only way that I've determined to police this in myself is to become super, super aware of how influenced I am. So there's a social psychologist named Solomon Asch, and in the 70s, he wanted to determine what causes people to succumb to peer influence and peer pressure. And so he ran this experiment. And in this experiment, he filled a classroom full of students. He put a piece of paper with a line on it on their desk, and the line was, say, 12 inches long, right? 30 centimeters. On the chalkboard in front of them, he had 3 lines drawn. One was far shorter than the line on the student's desk. One was exactly the same length, and one was far, far longer. And so obviously shorter and longer that when Solomon asked the students which line on the chalkboard is the same length as the one on your desk, 100% of them got it right. They said line number 2, same length. Okay, so it's an easy question. In the second phase of this experiment, he filled the room with a bunch of plants. These are actors that were working for him. He ran the same experiment, piece of paper with a line on their desk, 3 lines on the chalkboard, different lengths, but easy answer. Asked the same question. Which line on the chalkboard is the same length as the one on your desk? But before the students could answer, all of his plants quickly called out their incorrect but same answer. They all yelled out, number 3. And what Asch determined over running this experiment in over 17 different countries, over 330 times, is that he could influence up to 70% of the population to agree that the obvious wrong answer was in fact the correct one, just by being surrounded by some loud, confident voices. This is one of thousands of experiments that prove, as much as we'd like to believe we're independent, critical thinkers, the data says otherwise. We're really easily influenced by those around us. Priming is another key determinant in how we make decisions. A similar experiment, which university was it? I believe it was in Chicago, but similar setup, a handful of students in a room, and they were all given a word scramble. They had to complete this word scramble, and there were 2 study groups. In the first study group, the words they were finding were completely random, no affiliation whatsoever. In the second study group, the words they were finding were words like retirement or pension or Florida, or words that were related to an older population. At the conclusion of that word scramble, the scientist had all students walk down the hall to a second classroom. And that walk down the hall was the actual experiment. He timed all the students, how long it took them to walk from classroom A to classroom B. And all of the students who completed the second word scramble, that were surrounded by words affiliated with old age, walked significantly slower than the study group who didn't. They all slowed their pace of walking dramatically so. When quizzed, they all denied they would have done such a thing and saw no affiliation between the words they found. I mention this just because of how subtle these influences can be and how unaware we are of most of them, of how, you know, the inputs surrounding us impact the algorithm that spits out the output, right? It's you know, how do you combat against influences like this? Step one is acknowledging that they exist, right? And that allows you to then think more critically and slowly and patiently about, I'm making an assumption about this thing, about what I should do or whatnot. And, you know, acknowledge and understanding how arbitrary that algorithm can be helps us determine when we should step back and think a bit more critically about whatever it is that we're doing.
Wow. And most people are just like the priming thing. Like most people are just unaware with that. You know, I even put myself in the position of, if I was in that classroom and I heard people shouting out very confidently, you know, a certain answer, there would be a part of me that even if I thought I was right, I would second guess, like, well, maybe there's something else here that I don't see.
Yeah.
You know, so, but it's fascinating about the prime. So how is learning some of these things impacted how you go about decisions?
Yeah. So, you know, there's a couple directions I can take that. I think tactically, you know, I'm an investor, so I spend a lot of my time weighing decisions about how I might allocate capital. And as a consequence of studying psychology, I think I'm far more impersonal with my decision making, and that's worked out to my benefit dramatically so. Because I understand how arbitrary emotional decision making can be, I eliminate it 100% from my decision making when it comes to my investment portfolio. And you know, I have a set of rules that dictate how I get to a yes when it comes to allocating some cash towards an asset. Coming up with rules is the easy part. Sticking to them is hard because emotions are powerful and fear and greed are powerful drivers of decisions. But I think, yeah, once again, acknowledging how faulty that algorithm can be when taken into the modern world has forced me to be really, really strict with how I operate in the market, you know, and it's like, create your rules and stick to them at all costs. And no matter how I feel about something, you know, here's what my rule book is telling me to do. And so it takes the emotion out of what should be a very, you know, econ based and tactical based decision. But, you know, like, I guess getting more, you know, personal with it, Larry, like the herd mentality piece, right? And how we can just get swept up by the power of a crowd. My wife and I have this conversation really frequently because we're raising 3 kids. You know, we want to make sure that we're authoring the life that we really, really want. You know, we're not here for an okay existence. We're not here for, you know, a passing grade. We really want to be exceptional and provide our kids an exceptional experience. And that's forced us to look critically at other elements of our life where we might be on autopilot, right? So, you know, autopilot walks investors into bad decisions. Well, it walks parents into bad decisions too, you know? And by no means do I have the best path forward for parenting in any context. But for example, we've spent the last few years looking really critically at the education system and decided that we're going to take that matter into our own hands as much as we can. And this started with a very alternative early education system. So my older boys went through a program called Nature Learners instead of traditional preschool, kindergarten, grade 1. It's a fully outdoor-based education system. There's no classrooms. The whole thing happens in the forest. We're raising little hippie kids up here, and but it's lovely. And you know, I live in the Pacific Northwest, right? I'm in Squamish. It's snowy, it's cold, it's rainy, it's windy, many months of the year. But we decided, you know, what's a core life skill that'll serve our kids later in life? Well, resilience is, right? How do you build resilience, right? You learn how tough you are. And so, you know, that was a big deciding factor in us putting our kids in a fully outdoor kindergarten. It was like, this is going to build tough little mountain kids. And that's a good initial building block, right? That our children can learn that it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be a little bit cold. They're not in danger, right? It is a school, right? They are cared for, but they become comfortable being uncomfortable and they realize that that's okay, right? And alternate ways to learn some key lessons. Like, this is kind of another hippie concept, but I love it. Our kids are walked into the forest in the first week of school, and they all choose a tree friend, which is they just select a tree from the forest. And over the course of the year, they'll go back and visit their tree friend every few weeks and notice the changes, right? This tree friend, had leaves. It no longer has leaves, right? There was no moss. Now there's moss, right? Where there was no leaves, now there's little green buds. Now the leaves are back. Now the leaves are gone again, and they learn about things like cycles from studying the natural environment. The reason I love that is because how cyclical are our lives and is the world, right? And when we're up, we feel like we're going to be up forever. And when we're down, we feel like we're going to be down forever. Just studying basic seasonality teaches kids that things move in circles and cycles, right? And you have ups and you have downs, and duration is the key to success, right? Is just, long answer here, Larry, but we got there as a consequence of looking at where are we just following the herd, and where could we do a better job if we took matters into our own hands. And education, it's a key one. I think that, public school, private school, it's kind of the same thing. I'm not hating on it, and I'm not throwing shade. It's a great option for many, many people. It's also the path of least resistance. And I'm always cautious about the paths of least resistance.
Dude, that's amazing. So I have so many questions about this school that you sent them to, but I also know that that's probably not the direction we want to go in, because I want to talk more about mindset and marriage and how we go about those things. Let me ask you this: as far as, what do you think is most concerning about the school system right now that most parents don't even realize?
I'd say, what I'm seeing occur in terms of the adoption of conversations that my kids aren't mature enough to process yet. We're seeing that occur a little bit in the elementary schools around here. For example, I'll give you a couple examples. Canada has a history of residential schools. These are, black mark in our history books up here, where we took children from First Nations families and indoctrinated them in, more Western institutionalized education system. Lots of abuse, lots of violence, very tragic, should be recognized, should be corrected, all of this. This lesson was taught at my 3-year-old's elementary school, kindergarten. He came home, and this was taught unbeknownst to us. My 3-year-old came home and just casually informed me that sometimes at school, the teachers lock the kids in the classroom, take away all the food, and starve the kids to death. He accepted.
For real?
That's how he processed that lesson, because he was maybe he was 4, but that's a really heavy lesson. That's an important piece of history, because it occurred, right, to real people. It's tragic and horrifying. But to try to educate a 4-year-old on that concept is a bit premature. And he came home with the understanding that this might happen to him tomorrow. You understand how traumatized he was? Because at 4 years old, he just couldn't make that differentiation.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Right. And so the lesson he heard, right, which is all that matters, the one that he took home, was that this might happen to him tomorrow. And there's a lot of sort of virtue signaling style education being forced really early on in the education system that does concern me greatly. Another is, call it gender studies. I'm not sure how to put a sort of title on this, but we got a memo more recently that there was going to be a day where the older students at the school were going to teach the younger students about gender identity and all this stuff. And again, I'm just like, the boundaries that used to exist within our school system no longer exist. There's a place for academics, numbers, letters, and very valuable, but those boundaries are too blurry for me to have confidence in. And so thankfully the school sent out a memo in advance. So we just said, awesome, good for you. We'll keep our kids home that day. It's stuff that we want to, probably educate our kids on when the time is right at our home. Not something I'm going to trust a grade 5 to teach my kid about for some reason. It's beyond me, but that's the reason it concerns me, though, is because those are 2 events that I just discussed, but events never happen on their own. Events are usually part of a trajectory. right? And so what's the
Right.
trajectory of this system and this education and this curriculum? And that concerns me big time, big time.
Dang, man. That's crazy. I mean, I can understand like how your 4-year-old would take that and be like, oh my gosh, like this could happen tomorrow. But I do agree. I think we're seeing this radical shift in parents recently that they're putting their kids either in a totally different education environment, which, Matt Bordeaux is a good friend of mine. He runs the Acton Academies, which is, they obviously teach very differently. And, or parents are homeschooling. And I would say we're somewhat lucky here. We're right in the middle of the US, so we're pretty conservative. And I don't say conservative as in a political view, like Republican, Democrat, we're conservative. Conservative meaning like, I don't, at least in our school district, we don't see like these radical things that are like massive events and shifts and that type of thing, right? It's pretty low key type things that are going on. But I do think it's really concerning. The thing that I also think is really concerning, so like, for instance, I see what my kids are learning in school, right? And I really ask myself, is this preparing them for real life? And the answer is really not really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't know how to balance a checkbook, but they'll learn polyellograms in algebra. So like my oldest son has signed up twice, 2 years in a row, sophomore and now junior year, to take personal finance. And they are not allowing him in that class. They put another class in there. I can't remember what it was. And I'm like, you need this class. Like, this is the type of class they should have been teaching our generation in high school. And they didn't build it. Luckily in his class, they are.
Yeah.
And we contacted his advisor and I'm like, hey, with all due respect, he's applied for this 2 years in a row and hasn't gotten it. He needs to be in this class. What needs to be done to get him in this class? Well, they put him in it. But he also is a part of this other program now called CAPS. And to make a long story short, what it really is the program where he is now pulled out of school half a day, but he learns all about business. And he learns from other business owners. And it's a highly organized program that works with schools. And you have to like apply for it and be accepted in it. Like, it's a process to even get in this thing. But I'm sitting here thinking like, this would be an incredible opportunity for any student to be a part of. I mean, they make it really hard for you to get into it, but I'm sitting there thinking like, man, that the lessons that they are going to teach, like, so for instance, I mean, I've always taught my boys, and I'm sure you do too, how to shake another person's hand, right? Web to web. Nice to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Humble yet eye contact. You don't want to be like in their face, right? And like overpowering them with like this muscle of a handshake, but good firm grip. Nice to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you, ma'am. And what I can tell you is we started with that when they were like super little. So my kids already know this is how you don't shake a hand. One's like the dead fish. One is like, all that. So, but the very first concept that they taught at this CAPS orientation is this is how you shake a professional's handshake. This is what to do, what not to. He's like, Dad, I already knew this stuff. He's like, you would have been shocked how many people had no clue and they were still doing it wrong even after they taught us. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That's like one of the most, I remember my dad, when I think I was 6, like, and he was former military, my stepdad, and he was adamant about the right handshake. Yes, sir. No, sir. Please. Thank you. You're welcome. All these things. Mm-hmm. But they're not teaching that stuff. Like, he's not learning that stuff in school, but he's learning it through his other program. But these are things, you and I know this very well. In business, you need to have, some of these skills. They're so important, even in life in general, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you touched on the lack of financial education. And, that goes back. I actually, Larry, like, you look at the civil unrest and division that's occurring, all through the Western world right now, largely in response to wealth gaps, but it materializes and manifests in a handful of ways. I get it, and I get it because you can go through exactly 12 years of education. You can go to college. You can complete 15, 20 years of education and never have the concept of capital gains explained to you, credit and leverage
Right.
explained to you, interest rates explained to you. But you get spat out in the real world and suddenly you're on the monopoly board with everybody else. And you weren't explaining the rules, but you're playing the game now, right? And then suddenly you wake up at 30, 35 years old and you look around and there's obviously haves and have-nots. You find yourself a have-not and you're like, how did they get all that? How come I have none of that? Well, obviously they had to have cheated because there's no way they could have gotten so far ahead. But it's like, they didn't cheat. You were playing the same game, but nobody told you the rules. Obviously that manifests as anger. And then you got to point the finger, like, who's the bad guy? Who did this, right? And this spirals into the populism on both sides that we're seeing today, the massive expressions of civil unrest. And largely it's just due to exactly that, right? We all end up on the same board, but very few people know the rules. And of course they pull ahead. Of course they pull way ahead. And then of course there's anger, right? Like, and it's misguided. It's misguided because these subjects and very important topics are absolutely absent. And yes, we are very much focused on that in our house as well.
Yeah, man. Good for you. These are the things that we need. Let me ask you this, as far as like the Jay Martin show and everything that you're doing to put out in the world, what is your mission and what are you trying to help people with?
Well, it started because I wanted to add as much sovereignty to my life as possible. And that means, decoupling myself from the decision makers' decisions of others. A key ingredient to that is wealth creation. Wealth doesn't and cannot buy you happiness, but it can buy you options, and options are very valuable. So I'm an investor. I started, where I am, there's a lot of very active startup community. That's how I cut my teeth in the market, actually. And the podcast, the YouTube channel, the newsletter, it's all built on top of that. And so how it started, Larry, was like, okay, I want to increase my deal flow, the number of opportunities I see. I want to have more conversations with investors who have been in the game way longer than I have, and who've had way more success than I've had. I want sounding boards for my theses, right? I'm really bullish or excited about a certain topic. I want to talk to somebody who probably knows more about it than I do. And that launched the podcast. It was like, okay, by the way, everybody should launch a podcast. It's a phenomenal side hustle, if nothing else, because you get to have amazing conversations with amazing people. But I got to sit down with money managers, and still do today, 3 times a week. I sit down with money managers, serially successful investors, entrepreneurs who have been in the game longer than I have. And I do exactly that. I still do the same thing today. I stress test my theses with people who have been in the business, and they can say, oh yeah, you're on point with this idea, but you're 5-10 years too early. Or no, you're way off track and here's what you're missing. Or absolutely, you're right on the money. I'm doing the same thing. And that just helps me improve the performance of my portfolio. So it's sort of a selfish endeavor in that sense that, like, I started the podcast to benefit my portfolio. And over the last few years, we found hundreds of thousands of retail investors just like me who are on the same journey, just looking for the best home for their cash. I don't have time to be a full-time analyst or investor, but through conversation, I can cut through the noise and get to the signal and make better decisions as a consequence. And the business just expanded from there, right? Podcast, YouTube, newsletter. We do host a conference in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a total blast. We'll have about 5,000-6,000 people come out to it each year. And we just get up on stage and jam on similar topics. Where are you putting cash right now and why, right? And people who show up are people just like me who want the answer to that question. But that was the genesis, and it's become a really active community and super fun. Yeah, man. Yeah. Surprised me, actually.
That is so cool, man. So you really wanted to learn, right? Have better conversations with, I say all the time, I started this podcast 8 years ago because I want to have conversations with people smarter than me. Because I was trying to figure out this whole thing of fatherhood and marriage and patience and resilience and mindset and everything that we talked about today. And it has been this incredible journey of learning, just like you, which is great. And having that sounding board and the relationships that is built from this. So it's super great, man. And what you're doing in the world. I love your positivity. I love your energy. When is your conference? So the audience knows.
It's in January, January 21st and 22nd in Vancouver, British Columbia. And the conference business is called Cambridge House. So cambridgehouse.com. Find anything you want up there. Yeah, it's going to be fun, man. We're sort of ironing out the roster this year. Who's going to join us on stage? It's always fun to find, like, who's a bit controversial, who have I not heard from before, who's really on fire right now. We want to get into their blueprints. And then a lot of, frankly, like, it becomes a bit of a reunion, as like your conference must as well. It becomes a reunion of all these people that I get to see once a year,
Sure.
Both keynote speakers and otherwise. And so that's super fun. And, Vancouver is not the nicest time to visit. Sorry, January is not the nicest time to visit Vancouver, British Columbia, but it's a productive time to visit Vancouver, British Columbia. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just heard recently that it gets a little cold up there. And if you want to make your kids a little tougher, they can go outside, right?
We can help you with that.
That's right. Yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, you're not going to have to look far for Jay and all of his links. So we're going to have a link for Jay's newsletter as well, if you guys want to check him out. Also a link for the 2023 VRIC conference that's in January, like you said, in British Columbia. Also a link for his podcast as well. All you have to do is head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday122 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday122 for this show. Jay, this was a pleasure, man. Your energy, your focus, you're a force to be reckoned with. And I've loved so many things that we've talked about on this show, optimal dad health, how to make right decisions, the psychology of decisions, right? I love that you really have made this a self-study and really understanding this, what it means to raise boys and maybe pull them out of the public education system if it's not serving you. So lots of really good things, man. Is there anything that we missed?
Oh man, the hour flew by, Larry. Honestly, it was super fun chatting with you, dude. And look, dude, the respect is a two-way street. Love the platform and community that you've built and are building. And I think it's super, super important, especially right now. So, gratitude, my friend.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, my man. This was a pleasure. Awesome. If I could have conversations every day like this, back to back, where they're high energy like this, where it's contagious, man, I'd do it all day long. That's why I love my Mondays, because that's recording day. All right, gentlemen, like I said, head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday122 for this show to connect with Jay. Thank you again for all your continued support of the show, you guys. Thank you for sharing the show. Thank you for all the 5-star reviews. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.